It is Friday, January 17th, 2020, and I'm your friendly host, Debbie Levitt. And today on the Delta CX podcast, we are absolutely honored and super excited to have the super talented and also lovely and friendly and smart and everything, Sarah
Oh,
Buczek. Sarah, how did I do with your name?
no, that's perfect. Basic like music.
Buczek. Excellent. Hey, it is like music. Sarah is here to talk to us today about design systems. It's something really important and something I find not every UX specialist knows about, but it's something we're often curious about. So while I open the 8 million windows I have to open to get into all of the chats to see if anybody has questions, Sarah,
Right.
please introduce yourself.
Hello, world. Yeah, my name is Sarah Buczek, and right now I'm a CX designer. Um, I mean, there's so many different names for designers these days, but I got my start. Actually, my what propelled me was in high school. I got a job at a production design company after like winning a T-shirt contest. The guy liked me and hired me over the summer. And so I was at that point doing, yeah, I was working in Corel Draw. And
Hey, check
yeah,
you out. Street
I
cred.
know, right? Back in the day, Corel Draw and Quark. And uh, yeah, I've always been interested in if I didn't know how to do something, I'd figure it out. And yeah, I went from working with screens to realizing that this was something I could do as a career and pursued graphic design um, in college, and then got my start when I moved to San Francisco in the retail industry. We have a lot of retail companies here, um, and yeah, I kind of worked within retail, kind of heavily in marketing, but everything from print and digital experiences. Social media was picking it up, so doing a lot of everything from games to marketing material for digital. And actually, at my first job, I had a leader who was very, right. The focus for me at that time was really all of the design uh, aesthetics and methods and principles around making things look really good or communicate a certain message. And so that was my focus. And then our leader was very apt into getting us to understand the results and how well whatever campaign we were doing did for the business. And so that intrigued me, which I think, everything kind of stacks on each other. And so in later jobs, when I realized and was introduced to, I started working in more product designs and enhancements on websites and apps, and really being able to see the impact of the design, not just on the business, but on the end user. And so that's kind of how I've kind of veered more into the customer experience and user experience realm. And now I'm in an agency. I've always been an in-house, so I've been experiencing what an agency is like, very different. And I'm in the financial industry, which is also a new frontier for me.
Congratulations. Yeah, and I knew Sarah from the time we spent together working at Macy's.com, so I got to know her a little bit. Always the best Halloween costume every year. That's Sarah. So Sarah, before I ask you our first question, anything you want to plug or any place where people can find you, connect with you, get to know you better?
Yeah. My website is sarahbuczek.com, SarahBuczek. It's been my goal this year to kind of re-update it. I have a desire to kind of like Debbie, you inspire me to kind of be more of a thought leader within the industry. So that's kind of one area I want to incorporate. Um, uh, Events I go to, because I love sharing that with my team members and with friends about whether it's a tech conference or just a meetup in San Francisco. So it will still live on my Sarah Buczek, but to come. I have an Instagram handle, same name. I'm not really active on it right this second, but that's kind of more personal images and a lot of my art. I'm also a painter, so that's some of my my studio art out there. There's LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. All of those things.
Find her everywhere. So we're all here to talk about design systems. So for those who are watching or listening who have heard the term but maybe aren't too sure what it means, tell us your definition of a design system.
Yeah, so a design system is really it's heavily used right now in the digital industry, but it's a system that's set up with objects or components with really clear guidelines, which are usable, editable, and flexible, and they span across multiple roles, from a visual designer, UX designer, and a developer. I would say are the main folks that use it, and they're really to help all designers maintain a really consistent experience for a company, and hopefully eliminate slow designs or technical debt. Really, if you're in a company, you should not be spending time redesigning a button every single time you want to make. I feel like the button conversation is
what should this button look like? Don't we have a standard for that?
Like, make a primary and a secondary button and then move on. Maybe redesign in a couple years if your brand visual design changes. But yeah.
So thinking about a design system, I'm old enough to remember things that seemed like a design system, but we call them other things. Do you remember when we called things a component library? Is it the same thing?
Yeah, I would say a component library. I've heard pattern libraries. I've heard design systems or design system managers, UI libraries. I think common UI libraries are like Google's material design. I think Apple has a UI library. I know Bootstraps is a UI library. A lot of them work with React, which is a platform that can host all the documentation and the code, and it syncs up with GitHub. These are all just different ways to store. I would say GitHub and React are more for the developer to use said components, whether it's that button or it's a video player, or they can be as complex as a video player or as simple yet complex sometimes as a button. Anywhere I'm losing my, so yeah, I think there's different names. I feel like design system might be more of an umbrella, and a component library might more live within that system, because a component library is often just a collection of components, whereas the whole system can involve documentation, guidance, really syncing up that bridge between developers and visual designers and UX designers, and really creating this space where hopefully all are connected, thanks to cloud software.
Thank you, Cloud. Yeah, and just a reminder to everybody, we are live right now on both LinkedIn and YouTube. So if anybody watching has any questions about design systems, today is your day to ask it. No charge. We've got 2 people on YouTube right now. We've got 9 people on LinkedIn. Hello to everybody who's joining. Hopefully more will join in. So when I think of a design system, I think about all of the visual design components. Like, this is what a checkbox looks like. It's on, it's off, it's disabled. This is what primary button looks like. On, off, disabled, hover, all the possible focus. I'm running out of words. I'm so sleepy. So I think about a design system kind of having all of these pre-made pieces that can then be dropped in. And it even includes the spacing. And depending upon which system you use, like a lot of jobs I've worked at has wanted to use Zeppelin. It's not the only tool out there. Have you used Zeppelin with a design system?
I've heard of Zeppelin. I haven't used it, but I'm most familiar with the DM or Design System Manager through Envision,
Okay.
and I would say so. How that one's set up is through Sketch. A visual designer and UX designer can build out those components, and then sync that up with Envision. That kind of helps organize it into what you can define as different components. And then you can store the documentation. It creates kind of like a reference guide, like if you went to like a Google Material Design or a Bootstrap, right? That documentation for I hate this word, but like evangelizing the the look and feel and the function and different components. And I know with programs, it's probably the same with Zeppelin, is those designs can often be brought in and in Envision, for example, they're called tokens. And those design elements can be converted or kind of automatically convert into tokens, and which allows developers to grab the code for the things that are designed. So that's where it's helping bridge that gap. And the code, I think, in Envision, it's everything from CSS, SAS, LESS, right? It covers a bunch of different Android, iOS, different code bases. Because in the past, before the cloud, there was a big divide, right? You have people creating different designs within, typically it was Adobe, like an Illustrator, for example, or Photoshop. And I've seen even InDesign, which seems like not the best for it, but and then having to, redline, write all the specs, all the specifications, and then, pass that in our lovely waterfall method to to a developer to interpret. Hopefully people are working together when the developer builds out that component. But it makes it very manual that way. And when it comes to governance and updating and alignment with the different teams, it's a lot of work to maintain something so manual. But
I remember the days, as I know you do, of the PDF-based style guide,
yes.
where you had to some visual designer or team of them made a style guide, and you passed around a PDF, and you had to hope that every developer that got their hands on it coded everything in the same way, and you had all the specifications. But what ended up happening was a lot of between teams and silos and different products at a company, they were using different CSS classes, and they named things different things. And so you had this huge amount, even trying to make things look consistent. I think behind the scenes in all the code, there was a lot of inconsistency, which was sometimes also shown to the customer. I bet you remember those days.
I do. And it's still to this day, there are teams that work and communicate through PDFs. And yeah. Yeah, although you did mention style guide, similar to a component library. Style guides in the past, I think, were used as that guidance for developers to try and interpret. But I would say now style guide falls under that larger design system as part of it. It's part of the bigger system where a style guide is really documenting how the brand should be presented, both from a visual perspective and from a language perspective, right? So we have it's really to help with visual consistency. So, the main thing that differentiates a lot of brands is how they look visually. I love seeing, the logo, the future predictions of the logo. If you Google it, it's like where the Starbucks logo was, right? It's like this half naked mermaid, and then how it's become more modern. And like, there's like a future prediction that it's just going to be a green circle.
I thought it was going to be like a mermaid in a space helmet.
Yeah, that'd be another option. But yeah, just like how even like a brand's color can be associated with the brand itself, as rudimentary as that. And then you see the upheaval if someone is to if a brand is to, change their logo, the reactions are not always positive.
Yeah, how about that Airbnb logo change a few years ago?
Yeah, Airbnb. I remember Gap. Oh gosh, they put so much money into this logo rechange, and it was received so poorly. They stripped it. I've seen other. I can't think off the top of my head, but I've definitely seen some other companies struggle there. But yeah, so the visual piece, and then also the editorial style. I'm not a copywriter. I wish my copywriting was stronger, because it's an amazing skill. But yeah, really defining the voice, because it's most people don't realize the thought that goes into when you see marketing, or even like how things are written in a UI, or in a digital experience, how much thought goes into that editorial style. And so these are all parts of the guidance that would guide the pattern libraries, right? The padding, the color, the typography, how things move, that can all be tied to that bigger vision in the style guide. And then that would lead to, the component library. Oftentimes, I think a big trendy word right now is atomic design, especially for building these component libraries or design systems. Really, when you're fortunate enough to start at a company maybe from scratch and able to control I think in an ideal world, right? Defining those atoms, so everything from text fields, colors, logos, icons, right? Getting that baseline, and then taking all those little bits and then locking those in. So when you start building larger things, they call them molecules, right? Like a text field with a button. And then that becomes part of your header, which is an organism, right? It's this bigger piece. Buttons and headers. I can just go on for on the pain.
Kids, we're going to be talking about buttons and headers for an hour. Everybody pour some coffee.
Mastheads. I remember at Macy's, discovered that there was, I think, 90 plus different masthead types throughout, I think, just .com.
Is that just because of inconsistency or different states of pages?
It's a little part of inconsistency and probably a lack of design systems, or a lack of people aware of design systems. Macy's, along with some other companies, like I'm currently at Wells Fargo, right? These are old companies that are building on top of old legacy platforms. So things it's slow to make changes. So by the time you kind of lock into the new look, it'll take, like, for example, right now, Wells Fargo is going through a big brand design, or they've already gone through the style guide, right? The visual aspect of it, the voice. And so that's trickling into the UI. It took a year just to update the masthead and footer, just to get perspective on a company that is that large. And it's no fault to them. Like, you start learning about the technology that developers are working with. I know with Macy's, when we were trying to make minor enhancements to the shopping cart, when I would talk to a developer, no developer wanted to touch the code of that shopping cart, because it was so piecemeal together, and there was such poor documentation on it. That's a coveted space. You don't want to mess up the shopping cart in the experience. So everybody was too afraid.
Macy's makes the news for that stuff.
Yeah. And so they wanted to preserve and make sure that didn't get broken. But at the same time, it was nerve-wracking, I think, for the development team to, make those minor adjustments that I'm like, well, like, we need to update it. And they're like, well,
It's probably okay. We've been around
it's okay if it's an
150
older
years.
color or an older icon.
Red is red, right, Sarah? Red is red.
Yeah, no.
You're crying. You're like, I hate Debbie.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's that kind of goes back to the brand recognition. Like, oh, like that Starbucks logo, it is a specific green that, yeah.
Yeah, the color matters for the brand. The color matters for accessibility. The color matters for making sure people can tell a primary button from a secondary button and key calls to action. So everybody knows I'm a shitty artist, but the color matters.
Color is a huge part of design and huge part of how people read a site or experience. It's like, I could talk about color for days, but yeah, like colors have such huge effects on your feelings of something. Like blue is more relaxing, whereas red is more energizing and actually can increase your hunger level. Hence why we see all these fast food industries.
They're all red and yellow.
Red and yellow. And that's on purpose. Those are, whereas you like our flip side, you're in a hospital, a lot of rooms are like painted like a light yellow or a light blue, and because it actually evokes relaxation and calmness. So yeah, color has.
But can we agree in the year 2020 that purple is no longer royalty because it's not the year 100 AD?
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like yeah.
So not all concepts of color and some of these generalizations are current and modern.
Yeah, well, also, I mean, color is also like a social. There's a huge social tie to it, right? You can't separate your cultural associations with color because it's part of your psyche. So like how we process color in the United States can be very different than how we process the color in China versus India, where the color red, where it might be more of an aggressive color for us here in the States, it's not. It's there. It's like it's a more common, happier color. Like I think in India, wearing black to a funeral is actually really like a taboo. Like you actually want to wear color. Like color is just.
Any Indians joining us live who want to fact check that one? Or what's the color to not wear to a funeral? Indians joining us.
Or was it white? It might be white. Don't quote me on that one. But there was something about funeral or you don't want to wear black to a wedding. I mean, if you've seen an Indian wedding, like you want to wear the brightest color possible.
Yeah, and the bottom line is color, always research with your own customers and always have somebody who is hip to whatever is the regional culture, because color perceptions are just going to be different in different places.
Mm-hmm. And that's some of the thought that goes into that style guide. That again trickles down to all the other.
I'm going to talk about a use of design systems that I think is not good, and I'm curious if you agree, disagree, have no opinion, but chances are you have an opinion. So once in a while, I'll have somebody tell me that we really need to get a good design system together with all of our key components, drop down menus and tabs and checkboxes or toggles or whatever they are, so that we don't really need UX people. Because if we have a great design system and it's got all of the pieces that would go on a digital screen, then what do we really need UX people for? We'll just have someone take all of these components and put them on a screen because all the components are approved. So put them together and you have a good screen. Obviously, I don't agree. What are your thoughts there?
I don't think I would agree with that either. I wish I had like that perfect example, but just because you have a toolbox doesn't mean you know how to use it. right?
Always true. Ouch. Yes.
So yeah, a design kit system, again, is that toolbox. It's like saying you have a design system, you don't need a developer, because you can just drop those in.
Just copy and paste the code.
Just copy and paste the code into a page and it should just work. And I think everybody would freak out on that. Just like, because again, they are having a design system enables, improves velocity, because you're not having to rethink the basic structure or the foundation. Once you start needing to build a page, or whether it's like more of a functional page or a marketing page, you still have to, you still need a UX designer to understand what a user is coming to that page for, so they can kind of evaluate the hierarchy of the content, right? Evaluating the content, the hierarchy, and then, how a user goes from this page to other pages. Like that's all part of the bigger like flow within a system. And that's one little piece of the user experience expertise. And even before you get to that, taking those components, there's a whole slew of work that's done to even understand what we're building, under like reframing like all of that stuff. So I would say that's, as you know so well, especially like written in your book, plug in that book. Delta CX.
And let's just mention quickly, I have a book called Delta CX, and Sarah was one of the editors. She is like made of gold. She was so helpful. She even helped me notice a couple of my turns of phrase were outdated because I'm old and crumbly. So thank you so much for your involvement in the book. Maybe a good analogy for what I was just talking about is, just because you have a pile of ingredients doesn't mean the cake turns out well, and doesn't mean you are a professional baker, and doesn't mean you didn't kill someone by doing a bad job. Just a reminder, we are live. We've got 15 people live in LinkedIn and 3 in YouTube. Guys, we're taking questions. So if you have any questions about design systems, or remember, Sarah is a visual design expert. So if you, especially you on the UX side, if you have those curious questions about visual design and didn't know who to ask, and maybe we're embarrassed, ask us now. She's going to help us. So ask away. Remember that we're about 30 to 60 seconds delayed between when we're talking and when you guys hear it. So as soon as I see the questions, I'll relay them. I'm trying to think of other disastrous stories I've heard about design systems, but mostly design systems make me happy. Let me throw this one at you. When I'm art directing a project at my agency, and we're starting something really fresh and we want to create a design system, I didn't read a book on this. I fly by the seat of my pants. The first thing I do is I make a list of all the components that I believe we'll need, and I try to list every component a system could possibly maybe ever need. And then I have my artists start working on that, as well as anything relating to the branding, or maybe there's pre-existing branding. Now I'm making it up, but you as the expert, what would you say is the best way to start when maybe you have some existing branding at your company, you don't have the design system? Where should a visual designer start?
That's kind of where I was talking about earlier, that atomic design. And yeah, definitely Google it. There's a lot of documentation on the more details of how to utilize that within building a system. But from a kind of a simple standpoint, you want to take, if you're in a company that has maybe that style guide that's already been established, I would start with at least a style guide, because then, as you said, all these components already exist, right? You can go to the bigger companies like the Apples and the Googles, and you can just go on their style guide and, as you said, make a list. That's that's what your end goal will be. I think it's important to know, or to think, or to account for, you're not trying to reinvent the wheel at this point. Save that for these big companies who are have the opportunity to reinvent the wheel that affects design patterns. Your small little startup or retail company is not going to have the influence to affect that that user pattern. So that's just something to consider. So I think looking at those bigger established systems is a good, helps create a good checklist. Having your style guide, your visual system, your voice, that will help with your foundation, and then start building baseline. You've got your colors, right? Everything from more of the maybe the visual design colors, and then defining your more functional colors, whether it's error messaging. You definitely want to, red's a good example where there's a lot of tricky areas with red, because a lot of companies use red as their primary color, and then they also need it as a error messaging color, and but you'd also don't want to associate your brand with errors. So that's something. So really,
I can make so many jokes right now.
Yeah. So really defining I guess my current company, my last company, red is one of their primary colors. So
I know. I worked at Wells Fargo in 2012, and I just remember there being a mountain of red, but I remember that there was a real effort at the time, especially with the great accessibility guy that we had. I think it was David Ashleydale, who was kind of the champion of accessibility, and he was a real expert and really influenced me to think about accessibility. And he was like, okay, red's our brand color, and we've got to use it where we've got the logo and certain things related to the identity. But then outside of that, let's minimize the use of red because of some perceptions of it, because of color blindness. And so I felt like at the time we had a really good balance where we were using a lot of kind of cream colors. We were using a lot of greens and blues from the palette that Wells Fargo has. And then after they fired all of us, I don't know what changed, because I'm also a Wells Fargo customer. So then I'm seeing the new version of the website and the new version of the app, and it was like monster Mongo red header, red sidebar, red slide out menu, red everywhere. And I was like, where's David Ashleydale? Like, is anyone minding the store here? Do you ever look, and maybe not your current job because Wells Fargo is lovely, but do you ever look at a website and go, oh, holy cats. Oh, sweet holy cats. These people really, really didn't get it right. All day long, right?
Yeah, I can't think of a specific. Also, I probably don't want to call out a specific website. But...
I know. I'll then ask you the converse question. Since we did get it in the chat room, somebody asked, what are your favorite websites? Now, I'm assuming they didn't mean for like design systems. I'm assuming they're thinking as a pro visual designer, what are some of the websites that you think have been visually designed really well?
I mean, any of the Google platforms, I think they've, what's really nice about the Google and like the Apple space is what you take for granted in its consistency. That is like such a big part of a design system, the benefits, the purpose, and that's such a big part of how users experience a space, how they, what their impression of a space is. And I know from working at small and large, and now very, very large companies, the difficulty in making that all consistent, right? Especially when you're dealing with these large companies. So I'm always like in awe. I have friends that work at both places, and I've heard, the like at Apple, for example, like they're very design focused. So I really, I'm drawn towards that, right? That's built in their culture. So they value design heavily, but maybe to the extreme, right? They'll have meetings just about like line height and leading and things like that, which in the end, I mean, all of these like all the scrutiny they put on design, it kind of shows as the end result. You go to these sites, they make devices, right? And you are getting, you're getting served up a consistent experience, no matter where you go. I really highly value that.
I want to throw something in there. Some people know I used to work in the music business and right out of college, and I worked at a fairly famous recording studio from 1993 to 1995, and I worked for Donald Fagen of Steely Dan. And I remember they were working on an album, and Gary Katz, the producer, came in, and I was listening to them work, and they're listening back to something, and Gary Katz, who was the producer, goes like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like, make the hi-hat 1/2 of a decibel louder just in this section. And you could look at that and go, who's this
What's
jerk?
a hi-hat?
So great, also a great question. So if you think about a set of drums, the hi-hat is usually the thing to the left of the snare drum that's like, it's like the little one that they hit a lot. That's the hi-hat.
Higher.
Make it 1/2 decibel higher. And then again, that's a unit of volume. So, and at first you could be like, oh, who's this jerk just trying to look cool? But it's like, oh no, that's a Grammy award-winning producer who actually knows that is going to make an important difference. And the same is true for the visual designers. When you're working with a great visual designer, to me, they are like that guy who knew that if you change that shade a little bit, if you make the line height this, there is going to be a difference, and therefore that is important, and maybe it's worth having meetings about.
Yeah.
We have questions. Are you ready? So we've got some, I don't have my glasses on. We've got somebody, looks like your name is Roke. I'm so sorry. I'm so bad at names and I don't have my glasses on. It says, who do you visualize using the design system? Do you write it more towards devs with code so they can copy and paste, or PMs so they can better understand functionality? Are you making it for both?
Yeah. In an ideal world, a design system, and the example I gave earlier, using like the Envision design system manager, that has multiple parts to it, where it syncs up with the programs that visual designers are working with and UX designers. It generates documentation that lives online. So project managers are able to look at it. Stakeholders are able to see it and understand it, so you can prevent them from trying to change a button color.
Prevent them, please.
It's part of the system. And then I think the biggest help is that, again, that bridge between designer and developer, because as websites have become more complicated, there's more roles that are surfacing, right? In the past, in the beginning of the web, a developer, designer, actually a developer, right, was everything under the umbrella. They were thinking through what it looked like, how it worked, and then actually building it. And so now those have been kind of separated out into roles. Visual designers, how it looks; UX designers, how it, what the experience is, how it works for the user; and then developers are putting all the pieces together and making sure it works. And so, yeah, as things are getting more complicated, more security considerations. I'm learning a lot about security being in a financial institution. So I'm getting sidetracked, but all in all,
it's
to answer
okay.
your question, yes, a design system ideally should be for, it could be for anybody in the company that are a part of building a digital product or a physical product. I'm not going to touch much about physical, but that also involves, I know I have a friend who works for Herman Miller, and they work on the chairs everybody sits on in their office. And there's UX. I mean, Herman Miller is a great example of user experience design with product development, like physical product development, right? Chairs. If you look back on what chairs looked like in an office, they were not comfortable. They were not. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous what they look like, until Herman Miller went in and actually watched people, how they sat, how they used the chair, how they put their feet up on the desk.
Observational research.
Woo! Observational research, fly on the wall. And we're able to take that information and create a chair that met the needs of the user. And since then, I'm assuming that there's design style guides for the brand Herman Miller, and the style guides for the furniture they create, right? Because when you see a chair, you know it's made by that company. So that's the power of those design systems.
We've got more questions. First of all, a friend of the show, Marisol, said more cowbell. Marisol, it was almost that, but smarter.
Next time we talk, I'll bring a cowbell.
friend of the show, Udit, says, hey, sometimes we have technical limitations in terms of development. In that case, can we compromise in the design? Ouch. We've all been there.
Yeah. That's heavily tied to the collaboration of your team. So when you're in a more like siloed waterfall-y treatment or culture, that's a huge problem, right? Someone's designing something and it has a vision and sends it over to get produced, and developers often find all the faults in what was designed. And that's a problem. So really a solution is bringing those people to work together. I think Macy's was actually I've worked with a lot of different developers in the past, both remote and in person. But I think Macy's was where I was working with people in person closest, which was fantastic because we were able to collaborate on screen. I know pairing was a very popular term floating around, but it's just a baseline, and it's just a term used to tell people to work together. And so working through, oftentimes what I've seen is when that collaboration does happen, you can talk like a human being and be like, explain from a developer perspective why something doesn't work. And then a designer who's a problem solver can work through different solutions that can make both parties happy.
And I think that a couple of things there, if I can throw in my own answer, one would be using a design system would save us time. And so there shouldn't be any kind of compromise with respect to the design system. You already have these pieces, you can reuse these pieces. But obviously, as soon as a company is saying, we don't have time for that, what can we compromise? Obviously, I would show up with my book and I would be telling people, look, before we compromise stuff, let's take a look at the risks of doing that. Because yes, we might be able to shave off a few days or a week or a couple of weeks now, but what will that mean to customer satisfaction? What will that mean to having to fix it later? Like, if we think we're saving time now, in the long run, will we be glad we did that, or will we be kicking ourselves because now we've got something we have to fix or redo? So whenever I hear about a company looking to skimp on something or skip something, or ooh, we're out of time, where can we compromise on your design? And even I think I interviewed for the book. Remember Adam, the iOS developer at Macy's?
Yeah.
I interviewed him for the book, and he said something similar, like, this all goes pretty well until engineering says we don't have time for that. And he said it's unfortunate, but typically when engineering says we don't have time for that, the whole world says yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, and stuff starts getting, I'm paraphrasing him, of course, but stuff starts getting compromised. And he didn't like that. We don't like that. Customer doesn't like that. So it's one of those things that businesses do, but ultimately really doesn't work in the long run. Quick reminder, we are live. We've got 20 people in LinkedIn and 4 on YouTube. If you guys have questions, ask them. I'm definitely seeing your questions, and Sarah and I don't take a lot of breaths, but when we do, I will ask her your questions. So Sarah, while we're waiting for a couple of questions, I want to go back to the earlier question. What's a really well visual designed website you can think of other than Apply?
Well, I'm just trying to think through sites that I use regularly. Pinterest comes to mind. I would say I was originally giving examples of like, because of the apples and Google, because it's a larger ecosystem. But Pinterest kind of does cover, it meets the needs of what users are coming there for. It has consistency. Because I work in the marketing industry, it's really impressive how they are able to kind of incorporate native advertisements without you realizing it. It's not disruptive. Oftentimes, again, I'm coming from a marketing background, so I think that impresses me because it's not disruptive. It's not, hurting the user in any way. It's actually, most companies are creating ads, specifically Pinterest, with the user in mind, knowing that the user's coming for inspiration, for ideas. So a lot of those posts that are actually ads kind of have that same vibe to them. But yeah, so now if you are a Pinterest user, you will start spotting all the ads because it's every third one.
We fooled you until today.
Now you know the secret. Another big company here is it's like the Airbnb, and I really do enjoy when I've had to book them. I have some issues with Airbnb, but I think they do a really good job with their site and their app. It's very intuitive. It kind of meets there's a lot of communication and information that is involved that they have to convey on the site. And I think, I don't know, from a visual perspective, I think it's kind of beautifully done and clean, and I don't get bogged down with too many hurdles there. But yeah, how about you, Debbie? What are some of your favorite sites? I always that always gets me because I'm I guess I just keep reverting back to sites that I use most frequently.
Yeah, I'm trying to even think of what sites am I on frequently. And I think as a UX chick, as I sometimes say, and I hope that doesn't offend anybody, it's hard for me to look at a site and be like, this is great, because when you have UX running through your veins, you're always like, this is a freaking disaster. Who works here? Interns and cats, you're like, yeah, thank you. Yeah. So even when sometimes when something possibly is visually designed well, I'm just like, oh my God, sure, that may have looked good, but sweet holy Lord, I couldn't accomplish my task. So I am not too sure about sites where I have felt like I liked the visual design. And funny enough, sometimes I like the visual design of the website that sold me the thing. And then when I sign up for the thing and I get into their system, like the system they probably haven't touched in years, but they redid the website, then I'm like, oh, like your website was awesome, but then there's this other thing that's going on here that nobody has touched in a really long time.
Yeah.
I don't want to name any names. I'm tempted, but because I'm thinking of a really great company who I like and I like their product, but then I was like, ouch, A doesn't look like B. So that's inconsistency there. But I can also imagine the internal meetings where somebody's going, hey, look, we'll just make the public facing website look good. We'll just make the public facing website look good. And if we can sell them on the product, well, okay, the product looks a little older, but that's okay. I'm sure you've been in those meetings. Is there something you have found that you can say that helps companies go, oh crap, maybe we kind of need to redesign the whole thing?
I think surfacing when you do have the opportunity to get that user feedback, and that like qualitative comments, right? That normally can have a huge impact and helps remove people from their biases, or their preconceived notion that, oh, it's fine. And then you start seeing these great NPS scores that are like, everybody's complaining about your experience, and like, it's horrible. And then I think a lot of times too, when you tie it to business results, or a lot of times certain stakeholders will perk up when you can be like, if you are able to improve XYZ, here's the numbers that will help your what you're worried about. So kind of reframing what you want to improve and how it's going to help the stakeholder that you are trying to convince. I think a good thing industry-wise, though, I think there's a huge shift in people. I mean, there's a customer-focused shift, right? The customers have the upper hand. So for the benefit of user experience designers and visual designers, there's a big, people don't necessarily know what to do with it yet. And by people, I mean companies. But there's at least that shift happening where things do have to be made with the customer in mind, and they have to be made to get users to happy doing, because if something upsets a user, they're not going to come back, and there's plenty of other startups that are coming to solve that issue that your company has. So that competition's been helping there. And then realizing, especially with digital, right? And the fact we have a computer in our pocket, and it's with us all the time, and the mobile use is growing exponentially, that companies are finally realizing that they have to be building things on an omni-channel. I keep hearing that finally. I mean, I've been hearing it used more and more, which is great, because they're having to think across the board. I've seen a lot of the companies that I've been in, and the biggest change inside the company is breaking down those silos to create this like cross collaboration. So hopefully the app team and the website team can work together so that their experiences can be similar, because a user is probably, especially the loyal users, are going to probably use both, right? There's different uses for that. And if those experiences are vastly different, it causes confusion. So two things that I think are improving it is companies being forced into holding on to their customers and making them happy. So that's being part of it. And then realizing that they need to make people happy across the board.
Across the channels.
Across the channels, for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're running out of time. Make sure you're posting them to the YouTube. Oh, I'm having a Wi-Fi blip. The YouTube or the LinkedIn. Hopefully I didn't blip too badly. I have a question while we wait to see if anyone has last questions. I've been reviewing a whole bunch of junior UX portfolios lately. And obviously, a lot of people who've gone through boot camps and trade schools are being told, after you do these UX steps, do the UI of your app, website, project, whatever it is. And I find that a lot of people don't seem to know very basics. And again, I'm not a visual designer, but even I understand primary and secondary buttons and things about visual hierarchy and things about accessibility and things about color theory. Is there a book or a website? I want to be able to say to these people, holy cats, you don't even know what a primary and secondary button are. Hey, this is the book you should read, or this is the website you should know about. Is there kind of a Bible or resource out there for people to understand some of these basics of visual design?
Yeah, it's tricky for me. I wouldn't say there's necessarily one source. We're not like, unlike W3C, where you can get all the information you need for accessibility, or the 3C, whatever, I forgot the website for basic CMS, right? So for me, for my background, I've been doing studio art that evolved into graphic design. And I've been, I got like my bachelor's of fine arts is in design. So I spent 4 years understanding and learning about how people perceive design, what it means. So I think there's a lot of work, and I mean, even now, like there's still opportunities to grow once you get that foundation. I think, I don't know, the books that I read in college, a lot of them were design books that are probably just outdated. Maybe a good idea is to just like, I don't know, they have like old, like retro designs, which are kind of coming back. So I think a good idea could be to maybe reach out to a school near you that has like a design degree, and get their curriculum. See if you can get the books that the teachers are requiring you to read and understand. I think there's because I haven't really sought out visual design. Like I've been seeking out UX research classes to like have a better foundation there, and I take coding classes to kind of beef up my coding knowledge. But I haven't really sought out too many visual design courses.
And again, you may not know the courses. I just didn't know if you knew of any like books or a good website. Marisol is saying the NNG website, that's Nielsen Norman Group, nngroup.com. I don't know how much they go into primary and secondary button. I don't know if they go into them from a UX perspective, a visual design perspective, or both. I just didn't know if you happen to know. And again, I'm bad at recommending UX books. I just didn't know if you happen to know. Oh yeah, when you see people who don't seem to even know the basics, this is the book to read. So if you think of one, let me know and I'll share it with the audience. No, and of course, a friend of the show, Luis, who I believe I'm also tweeting at times, says, well, some UX students don't even understand the difference between a hypothesis and an assumption. Yes, that's very true, Luis. And based on the portfolios I'm seeing, they really don't. So you're completely right there. And that's a whole other discussion. We'll have you on for that, Luis. You want to be a guest on the podcast about hypotheses and assumptions. But back to you, Sarah.
Yeah, I was going to say, it really depends on someone's background and skill level. I've seen portfolios, where that's very heavy on the research, and then when you get into the design, it's definitely lacking. So I guess similar to me trying to beef up my my chops with UX knowledge and programs and experience. I think that's something that, you know what, I'm actually pretty impressed with. I use like the LinkedIn Learning a lot. I think they have a lot of good courses on there. I think that's my go-to when I like want to learn everything under the sun, whether it's business related, or design related, because that would help with at least program knowledge. And in a lot of the examples they use would tie back to design. And yeah, I would the LinkedIn Learning, the Udacity, a lot of those, especially like Udacity, they have like full-on universities sponsoring courses. So they're actually tied to, I think there's another, I forgot, there's another, Coursera, I think does it too.
Udemy?
Where you're like, Coursera?
What about Udemy?
Udemy, yeah. I don't think I've taken a class on there, but another one. Sorry, now I'm thinking of them. Maybe more. This one's more craft, but Skillshare has a lot more of the like if you want to learn about patterns, like not necessarily design patterns, but like a pattern. Like I want to make a textile pattern, and you can learn a lot about colors and complementary and contrast colors and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of online classes to help build your foundation there.
Yeah, and Luis is also recommending the Interaction Design Foundation courses. I haven't seen those. I think some might be a little bit wacky, but in general, I hear good things about them. So he's theoretically solid despite their basic e-learning experience. Okay, so maybe it's not the flashiest e-learning experience, but it sounds like lots of solid information on Interaction Design Foundation. So we are at 6 o'clock my time. Anyway, go ahead, Sarah, but we're going to wind up.
The Nelson Norman recommendation, because I use that site all the time. I love their articles. And they have a really good foundation. Like they're kind of, if you want to know a little bit more about the psychology behind like a page hierarchy, they can provide some of those details for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had a great turnout today. Thank you so much. This was really a popular topic. We had 25 people in LinkedIn. We had 5 people in YouTube, and we even got likes on YouTube. I've never had likes while someone is talking. So, Sarah, you were a big hit. Thank you so much for carving time out of your early San Francisco morning for us. Again, everybody, this is Sarah Buczek. Find her on LinkedIn. Find her all over the web. SarahBuczek. And any parting words for our fans?
Just push for using design systems. They will make your life easier, and collaborate. Work with all the people.
Great advice. So I'm going to wind it down here, but thank you again. And we'll see everybody. Quick programming note. We'll see everybody on Monday at the crack of dawn. Monday's podcast will be 7 a.m. East Coast time as Dr. Seth Finkel joins us again to talk about empathy. You don't want to miss that. Set your alarm, wake up early, or just find it on YouTube after that's 4 a.m. for you. Sorry, Sarah.
I will not be awake for that. I'll watch the replay.
Right. I was going to say, these are archived on YouTube immediately after I stop the recording, so you can always find them there. Remember that Friday the 24th is the Concentric Conference, a full one day live on Zoom with lots of different speakers. I think we have 15 different talks that day, and it is currently free. So you can find all that at deltacx.com. Just look for Concentric under events. And we will wind up for today. But thanks again to Sarah and for great questions today. And we'll see you